My name is Arthur Porto, and I'm proud to open this session of the 2022 North Kingstown Candidate Day. We'd like to thank all the candidates that are present and acknowledge the time that they have taken out of their day to be here. The candidates for Rhode Island Attorney General will now be introduced. May the first candidate please walk up to his podium.
Hello, I'm Brendan Downey, and it is my honor to introduce Charles Calenda, who is running for Attorney General. Mr. Calenda graduated from the University of Miami School of Law in 2006 and spent 12 years as a Special Assistant Attorney General. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce our next Attorney General, Mr. Charles Calenda.
Thank you, Brendan, and thank you all for having me here. As you mentioned, my name is Charles Calenda. I go by Chaz. I've been a practicing attorney. I've been a practicing attorney for approximately 17 years. Next month, I started my career here in the practice of law at the Office of the Attorney General in 2006. I spent 12 years there practicing as a criminal prosecutor at all levels of the court system. I handled some of the most complex and important cases that office handles on the criminal side. And I'm running to be your Attorney General because I think it's time that we take our politics out of what that office does. And that office is the Chief Law Enforcement Office for the state of Rhode Island. It really should not matter where I come from on the political spectrum or where anyone comes from on the political spectrum when you're making decisions about how to either bring a case, prosecute a case, defend a case, or whatnot. Because the law is the law. The Constitution is the Constitution. It says what it says, and it doesn't say what it doesn't say. So I want to restore that role of the Office of the Attorney General. Thank you.
I am Lydia Turner, and it is my honor to introduce Peter Neronha, who is running for Attorney General. Attorney General Neronha has been Rhode Island's current Attorney General since 2019, and appointed by President Obama as United States Attorney in 2009, serving until 2017. He advocates for gun safety, protecting public safety, safeguarding Rhode Island's natural environment, and consumer and worker protection. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce Attorney General Neronha.
Thank you, Lydia, and it's good to see all of you. It's great to be back in my alma mater, class of '81. When I took office in 2019, what I wanted to do was reinvent how we work that office as the Attorney General's office. I wanted to reinvent what it is we do and how we do it. So what does that look like? I wanted us out on offense with the people of the state every single day in healthcare, saving 2 Rhode Island hospitals, for instance, getting out on offense with respect to the environment, intervening in the marina expansion on Block Island, shutting down a medical waste recycling plant in West Greenwich and East Greenwich, getting involved in the Port of Providence for the expansion of a gas facility that wasn't going through the proper reviews, getting involved for Rhode Island ratepayers when it came to the change of our public utility, consumer protection, getting out on offense. I wanted to change us from a defensive mindset to an offensive one, because that's how we impact Rhode Islanders in the most positive way. When it comes to public safety, same thing. Getting out on offense, identifying those who drive violence in the city of Providence. We put together task forces doing that every day. It's why I'm running to keep doing that work. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you for this opening statement. At this time, anyone who wishes to ask a candidate a question may come up to the microphone at the front of the stage. I will remind the candidates that they have 1 minute to respond to each question. Anyone that has a question may come up now. Mr. Neronha, you'll go.
I wanted to ask y'all's opinions on the overturning of Roe v. Wade. What is your opinion on the overturning of Roe v. Wade?
Yeah, I think the overturning of Roe v. Wade was wrongly decided, if for no other reason than it threw out 50 years of jurisprudence that generations of women had relied on with respect to their reproductive freedoms. Now, Rhode Island has passed the Reproductive Privacy Act, which codifies Roe v. Wade into Rhode Island law. But to think that that ends the issue here in Rhode Island, it would be incorrect. There's already been one challenge to that law that our office, under my watch, has successfully defended. The people trying to turn that back in Rhode Island, try to take that case to the Supreme Court, we beat them there as well. But it's not going to be the last fight when it comes to women's reproductive freedom, and I'm proudly engaged in that fight.
It's the same question.
I get the same question. So, as Mr. Neronha mentioned, Rhode Island has spoken. The Supreme Court, all they said was the states were able to make up their own minds when it came to what that right of having an abortion maintains. Rhode Island had passed that law, the Reproductive Rights Act, in 2019, I believe it was, and the law in Rhode Island is clear. You have access and it is available should you want to do that procedure, and there is no constitutional prohibition to doing so. So as the Attorney General, if I'm elected, it is my obligation to defend that law since it is consistent with our U.S. and Rhode Island Constitution, and it is our state law here in Rhode Island.
So I'm pretty most of you have noticed the expansion of neighborhoods in North Kingstown, specifically the Glen. I was wondering, do you plan on implementing laws to conserve the woods in that area, or just in general in all of Rhode Island? Mr. Calenda.
Well, I understand that there's a lot of candidates who are probably speaking during this whole thing that have different roles on what the Attorney General does. The Attorney General can't make laws. The Attorney General is there to enforce the laws and to make sure that our Constitution is enforced. As far as protecting our environment, there are laws on the book that allow the Attorney General to get involved when those laws are not being followed or they're being abused by perhaps a developer or somebody who's not meeting the minimum requirements as required by law. So there is a role for the Attorney General. We can't just, as the Attorney General, write a law and expect that to be the law of the land. We can offer our legal opinion as to projects that have been proposed, projects that are being done or have been done, as to whether or not they conform with our laws. But as far as making laws, we don't have the ability to do that. It's just not part of our constitutional role.
I think this is where my opponent and I really disagree on what the role of the Attorney General is. I think the Attorney General can and should fight the laws that impact Rhode Islanders significantly. For example, we fought at the General Assembly to get our consumer protection law changed so that we could fight on behalf of consumers. We couldn't do that before. Now we can. We won't have the car dealers that are ripping off Rhode Islanders. I'll give you many other examples of healthcare, gun safety, many other areas where we fought for laws that make Rhode Islanders safer. When it comes to the environment, we've been very active there. In fact, we've intervened in places where other state agencies have not done what they should have done. The Coastal Resources Management Council, the Commission of Public Utilities and Carriers. We've gone to bat with PEM to stop the draining of Johnson's Pond. That's another example of where the agency needs to be out on offense and active to protect the people of the state. If we're not doing that, we're not doing our job. If we let the work come to us, we're not doing our job. We have this tremendous power in the office. It's incumbent on us to use it, because we're not using it, we're not helping Rhode Island.
I want to know your opinions on the common sense law regarding gun safety.
Mr. Neronha.
Yes, I've been a strong proponent of those laws. I've testified in favor of them, and I've advocated for them at the General Assembly. Here's why. Every one of the gun safety laws that we passed, going back to the red flag, risk protection laws, to ghost guns, to preventing guns from being carried in schools, to preventing rifles to be carried loaded down the street, high-capacity magazines, ghost guns, strong purchasing. I've supported them all, and here's why. They make Rhode Islanders safer. It's another example of where if you're the Attorney General, then you know that changing the law will make Rhode Islanders safer. You need to be out on offense to get that done. We got every single one of those laws passed. I'll just give you one example. Again, before this year, it was lawful to carry a fully loaded AR-15 down a public street. And the police couldn't even stop that person and ask him if it was loaded or why they had it. That did not make Rhode Islanders safer. It's one of the reasons I advocated for that law. Same thing with ghost guns. Ghost guns are guns without serial numbers. Okay, it should be no surprise. You can get them online. You don't need to pass a background check to get them. It's no surprise that criminals get them that way. That's why I've advocated for these laws.
The fundamental disagreement that we actually have is that I believe in your constitutional rights, and Mr. Neronha apparently does not believe in at least one of them. The second, Rhode Island, the United States Supreme Court has ruled, and it did so affirmed this year, that you have an individual fundamental constitutional right to keep and bear arms, and that any restriction on those rights must be deeply rooted in American history and tradition. Federal courts across this country have been striking down the laws that this Attorney General has been advocating for, and it's happening right now in Rhode Island. So whether you agree with his positions that guns are bad, or we need to do this to protect the people, we as the Attorney General have an obligation to follow our laws and follow our Constitution. There's a process to change it. If you don't like it, I suggest that you go to your legislators, you go to the United States Congress, and you go to the courts to change that process. But whether or not I agree with that constitutional right, it's my obligation to enforce it, and I will do just that.
How you guys doing? You guys both seem like super upstanding guys. I'd like to stray away from the political side of this and really just know why you're running, kind of the background, what makes you a good fit for this position.
It's a very good question, because I don't know why people get involved in these political races anymore, because they are so vitriolic. The reason I'm doing this is because I think that the Attorney General has the ability to make a change in the status quo here in Rhode Island. So I don't believe in the change that Mr. Neronha believes in. I do believe in the change that we need to bring the law above politics. So my personal politics are never going to play a role in what we do in the office of the Attorney General. So you can agree with me politically or disagree with me politically, and I think that's great, because we need to have a robust discourse about what's good, what's not good. But the reason I'm running for this is because I worked there. I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly within that office. Unfortunately, over the last 4 years, I think we've seen a lot more bad than good, and I think I have the ability, the experience, and the knowledge to change that going forward.
Yeah, thank you for the question. To me, it really comes down to really three things: experience, approach, and substance. When it comes to experience, I've been a line assistant attorney general. I've been an assistant United States attorney. That's a federal prosecutor. I led the U.S. Attorney's Office for 8 years. I've now led the AG's office for 4. So my experience relative to my opponents, they're just not the same. They're not comparable, frankly. When it comes to approach, I think you've seen the difference here. My approach is to use the power of the office expansively. Okay? And when that means fighting on behalf of Rhode Islanders, defending laws that this state has passed to make us safer, I'm going to defend them. Our laws have been passed, that way I'm going to continue to defend them. I want to get on offense with the environment against public utilities ripping off Rhode Islanders, not protecting our climate. I'm going to do that work because that's what's important to Rhode Islanders. And and when it comes to approach, again, it's sort of let the work come to you, which is the way my opponent looks at it. Or for me, it's finding the work that would make Rhode Islanders' lives better. Again, if we're not in that game, I don't know why we're serving in this office.
What is your opinion on the truck toll case that's currently under constitutional review?
Senator Rhode.
Yeah, so that is a case where the General Assembly and the governor some time ago and most recently have decided that is a way to generate revenue to fix our bridges and highways in Rhode Island. As Attorney General, it's my job to defend the state when the state is sued. We talked a little bit about me getting out on offense for the state. That's when I choose the issues I'm going to fight on. Truck tolling is a situation where I defend the state. I reviewed that decision by Judge Smith in the federal court. I used to appear in front of him when I was an assistant U.S. attorney. I believe that there is merit to the appeal. The governor and the General Assembly agree as well, and so that case is going to be taken up on appeal. What are the issues? The issue is the Commerce Clause in the United States. The Commerce Clause is kind of a funky thing that I can't imagine many of you are all that interested in. But the bottom line is it's not an area of settled law. There are a lot of forks in the road, and for matters of this importance to the state, an appeal is warranted, and the possibility or the probability of success is there. So doing my job on behalf of the state, I'm defending the state in that appeal.
The Attorney General certainly has a role to defend the state government when it's appropriate. The Attorney General also has a role to independently assess and give a legal opinion about the merits of any case going forward. My opponent has been a rubber stamp for the administration over the last 4 years, and not exercising independent legal judgment in determining whether or not he's going to either defend or prosecute matters that come before his office. I would look at the decision by Judge Smith, and I saw very little wiggle room for a success on an appeal. Doesn't mean it can't happen, because none of us can predict what a court will do. What I will say is that it is pretty much basic law that is settled that the Commerce Clause cannot discriminate against certain classes of people when it comes to interstate commerce. And that means people going across state lines for business purposes or whatever purposes it is. There was very little wiggle room. They vigorously argued this at the trial court level, and the Truckers Association won. We threw $7.9 million at outside counsel to assist the Attorney General in doing that. I think we can use our money in a better way than just simply rubber stamping a bad decision.
What do you guys plan on doing marijuana being laced with fentanyl and teens being have access to it?
Mr. Calenda?
I can say that the law in Rhode Island has been constantly changing as far as marijuana, cannabis, whatever you want to call it. Certainly, if you are of legal age to possess a legal amount of marijuana, there's absolutely no problem from the Attorney General's office perspective that there would be a problem with it. It's the people who are dealing in hard drugs which cause a problem in our society. So I would say, if I'm elected Attorney General, enforcement of criminal sanctions for marijuana is not going to be on my priority list. I will say that the bigger blight on our society is going to be the possession of larger amounts of harder drugs, things like fentanyl, where you don't actually have to be an active user to be affected by that. You can now have up to 10 grams of fentanyl, and that be a misdemeanor offense. It used to be a felony offense, but 10 grams of fentanyl would kill everybody in this room if it was airborne. I don't think that should be a misdemeanor. I don't think we should be looking the other way on that. I think we should help people who have drug addiction problems, but we shouldn't be punishing most of them. I have the strong exception of the fentanyl reduction in penalties, because that is a public safety danger, and it was unfortunate to see our current chief law enforcement officer advocate for the reduction in penalties specifically related to fentanyl.
Question. Once marijuana is legal, there won't be obviously any criminal sanctions for possession of marijuana if you are an adult. One thing that does concern me is driving under the influence and being able to detect drivers who are under the influence of marijuana is very hard to detect. When it comes to harder drugs, you know, the focus of my administration has been on those who are dealing drugs to others. I don't believe that people who possess a small amount of drugs for personal use should be handled with the maximum impact in the criminal justice system. Those are people who need help. What we really need to do is go after the people who are dealing those drugs to them, and that's exactly what we've done. Separately, when it comes to opioids, we have recovered, in my administration, $265 million in medicine or cash to help people who have a substance abuse problem. $265 million. The first $20 million of that just went out the door the other day. And so, to me, that's where the fight is. The fight is helping those who have a substance use disorder problem, not putting them in the prison. That doesn't help them, doesn't help anybody else. Going hard after the dealers, which is exactly what we're doing. And we're working really hard to sue opioid manufacturers, distributors, and consultants to bring back all that cash to help those people who have those problems. Because the reality is, the state does not have enough money to help everybody who needs help. This $265 million will do exactly that.
Okay, so when you said that you enforce the articles of the Constitution, are there any that you at least partly disagree with, or any you think should be revised or updated?
Yeah, where I see the constitutional issues coming before us are really now in two places. One is women's reproductive freedom, and it's all well and fine to say everything's going to be fine with a woman's right to choose, because that's what people were saying 4 years ago, before Dobbs overturned Roe v. Wade. So when people tell you it's all going to be fine, don't worry about it, you don't need an attorney general who's going to fight for you, they're not giving you the whole story. You need an attorney general who's going to fight for that, because if you don't fight for it, that right's not going to be upheld. So the Rhode Island Reproductive Privacy Act remains under attack. Again, it was just a lawsuit that we successfully fended off just within the last couple of weeks. So you need an attorney general who's going to fight for that. When it comes to gun safety laws, let's be clear. The Supreme Court, in its most recent decision, was not a unanimous decision. It had a number of components to it. There were a lot of unspoken areas to be determined yet. So my position is this. I believe that the gun safety laws that were passed by the state that I advocated for make us safer. And those laws have not been overturned in Rhode Island or anywhere else, but in particular Rhode Island. I'm going to continue to fight to defend them. Because if you take the analogy that you can have any gun that you want, okay, that the Second Amendment protects your right to have anything that you want, well, that means that I can walk in here with a fully automatic machine gun, okay? And that cannot be what the law says. And until someone tells me that's what it does say, I'm going to continue to defend those laws, because those laws keep us safer.
What that was hyperbole. You were never able to walk in here with a fully automatic weapon of any kind. Those have been long prohibited, and those have been long held illegal under federal law. Nothing Rhode Island passed in the last year did any of that. And the Second Amendment is not an unlimited right. There are long-standing traditional restrictions that go back to the time of the ratification of the Second Amendment, as the United States Supreme Court held, have to have been in existence in order for you to restrict the Second Amendment. So I'll just say that. And you have to respond to the other thing, that these laws have not been held unconstitutional. In many federal courts they have. In the federal court, just the District of Delaware has struck down ghost gun laws. The federal courts in the District of California have struck down laws that prohibited anyone under 21 from possessing firearms. Several courts have already held that the high-capacity magazine rounds have been unconstitutional. They're still fighting those out in several different circuits, and there's a lawsuit pending in Rhode Island right now. Because the Supreme Court has ruled the way it did, we have an obligation, regardless of my personal views, we have an obligation to enforce our constitutional rights the way the Supreme Court has interpreted them. And there is a process for changing it. It's difficult. Just like you probably taught in your civics classes. Changing the Constitution is difficult. It's supposed to be difficult, because we don't want ever-changing laws that are governing us all the time, that people don't know when they're ever going to change. So there are many areas maybe that I don't agree with in the Constitution, but it's not my role as the Attorney General to say, I don't agree with it, so therefore I'm not enforcing it. That's the role of the legislature, that's the role of the Congress, and that's the role of the President of the United States, and in the state level, the governor, to make those decisions. And that's why you elect those people who are your representatives to make those decisions on your behalf.
Over the last decade in America, there's been a huge opioid and drug crisis, and one of the reasons was because of people illegally getting drugs in the black market and drug dealers. And I heard that the federal government was gonna legalize certain hard drugs like cocaine and create federal programs that will give like small controlled amounts of to addicts to help them. As the Attorney General, would you guys support programs like these?
Calenda?
I support all the programs that are going to help anyone try to get over an addiction. We have, here in Rhode Island, several diversionary programs within our criminal justice system that do exactly that. They take people away from the prosecution division and they get them treatment and help. And I'm for any system that is actually going to do that. I'm certainly not looking to go put the maximum penalties on people who have a drug addiction. I agree, actually, with Mr. Neronha, that our focus should be on people who are providing these hard drugs, the drug dealers, to our youth, to our people, because they are causing the majority of the violent crime that we're seeing on the rise. So yes, I do support those programs. I support the programs that we have currently in Rhode Island and other states. I don't know if there's one yet on a national level that applies in all states, but I would support anyone getting the help that they need and keeping them in society so they can be productive members of society and not be completely barred with a felony conviction simply for being an addict.
That's a great question. You know, my approach has always been to go hard after drug dealers, understand that people who possess a small amount of any kind of narcotic for personal use is something which warrants something other than jail. I don't think we serve any purpose by putting somebody who has a substance use disorder in jail for having a substance use disorder. They need help. And so when I became Attorney General, I advocated for it with the presiding justice or created a diversion court where a lot of those offenders go, along with other youthful nonviolent offenders. The whole point is that when they get through that program, the case is dismissed and they're not carrying crime around their neck, which prevents them from getting help going forward. But it's also why we've worked so hard to hold these opioid manufacturers, distributors, and consultants responsible. Again, because of those lawsuits, there's $265 million worth of medicine and cash coming back to Rhode Island to help people who have substance use disorder. You know, we were one of 9 Attorney General holdouts who went hard after the Sacklers at Purdue to put another $1.5 billion into the national deal and make sure that the Sackler family had to confront the families whose lives they ruined. But I look at this really as a two-part issue. If you are someone who has a small amount of drugs for personal use, you need treatment. Okay, whether you get them through the court system or otherwise, that's where those cases belong. And in terms of people who deal drugs, they deserve the full weight of our prosecutorial efforts along with shooters who drive violence in our cities and in our communities.
If laws and like the Constitution have been passing things that are trying to prevent gun violence and you're being dependent on those laws, why is gun violence still such a relevant thing in this country?
Yeah, I think the reason why violence is so prevalent in this country is there's just a tremendous amount of guns on the street. You know, when I was a younger prosecutor from 96 to 2009 on the line, you know, most people shared a gun in Providence. So if you were somebody who was shooting somebody in Providence, you borrowed a gun, or somebody hid it behind the shed, you went and grabbed it. Many times, by the time you came back to shoot the person you wanted to shoot, they were gone. There's just a lot more guns out there right now, and there are a lot of things that are driving that gun violence and making it worse. High-capacity magazines, there are more bullets in the air. There was a scene in Providence, a 60-round magazine, a 50-round magazine, a 40-round magazine, a 30-round magazine was recovered. The ghost gun law, we've charged 52 ghost gun cases. People who are going online, buying kits, drilling the holes in the gun part kits, and putting guns together. It should be no surprise that criminals are getting the guns that way. But there are two choices. There are to not pass laws that I still believe pass constitutional muster that can make us safer, and then prosecute people for violating them. We just hit a big case with our Urban Violent Crime Task Force. A couple in West Warwick had silencers, body armor, ghost guns, machine guns. Okay? Our team went after them and got those guns and those people off the street. That's what brings violence down. Targeting people who are putting guns on the street, either they're buying from people who can't buy them, or they're putting them together by buying the kits online. But we couldn't do that work if we didn't have the tools to be able to do it. So my opponent talks about gun laws that are being overturned. One gun law that got overturned that he celebrates is this law that used to, or in many places still does, prevent you from taking a serial number and scratching off your gun so police can't trace it. Okay, it is true, a court in West Virginia threw that out. Okay, how is that good for the people of this state? Okay, so that when the police get a gun from a crime scene, they can't trace it. This is where the Supreme Court is headed. But until in Rhode Island our laws are overturned, I am going to continue to defend those laws because I believe eventually the Supreme Court will recognize that the path that they've started us down can't lead to what many would believe is its logical conclusion. When we come to the case that my opponent references, it's in court right now, it's about high-capacity magazines. Query whether the Second Amendment, okay, covers things that aren't firearms like high-capacity magazines. That's why we're having that argument, because I'm not convinced that it does. I'm going to fight for those laws, because this state passed them, and I believe they keep us safer. Thank you.
Thank you for asking the question, because I think it's an important answer to it. The reason why these gun violence is still prevalent here today is because people who engage in gun violence are not going to follow whatever laws you follow. They're going to go, whatever laws you pass. They're going to go out and commit these laws no matter what. And Rhode Island has always had the tools to go after them. As far as I know, it's never been legal to go out there and use a gun and kill somebody or shoot somebody without a justification. We had those laws long before 2022. The laws that were passed and advocated for by this Attorney General this past session only criminalize people who are otherwise law-abiding citizens. And the reason why it's still a problem is because you have to balance the rights of the individuals, the Constitution requires that, versus public safety. We can sit here and all agree, I think everybody in this room would probably agree that we do not want violence, we do not want gun violence. I agree with that. What I also think we have to agree on, and what we need to make sure we're moving towards, is balancing protecting society with the individual rights of the people under the Constitution. Rhode Island does not get to trump the United States Constitution or federal law when it comes to passing laws regarding anything that the Constitution talks about. So while Mr. Neronha may believe that these laws are constitutional, several courts are already holding that they're not. So when you start getting the dominoes falling, we should be getting ahead of that, making sure that our laws are consistent with our Constitution, rather than getting into legal battles, arguing about, well, this is good for public safety, so we have to do it no matter what the courts say. That's the wrong approach, that's a partisan approach, and that's why I'm running here, is to take that partisan approach out of the office of the Attorney General.
Begin to elapse. We have time for 2 more questions.
I wanted to know if you believe that the Constitution should be a living document that is being changed as society progresses, or if it should stay the same and be maintained since it's through like other laws.
The terms Constitution, either a living document or a static document, those are politically charged terms. What I believe is this. As an individual, I believe the Constitution is subject to the changes that our government and our people are agreeable to. And like I mentioned earlier, it is a very difficult process to amend our Constitution, but it can be done in 2 different ways. So if there are our representatives who believe that there are rights in the Constitution that you do not think should exist, that's the process we should go down. I, as the Attorney General, if I'm elected, am not in the position, do not have the authority to change the Constitution. I do not have the authority to change the law. I should not be advocating for partisan causes because it brings down the level of confidence that the public has in my independence as the Attorney General. If I'm out there advocating for public changes to the Constitution or public changes to the law, I look like I'm taking a side. The only side I am going to take is that for the people of Rhode Island and making sure that our Constitution and laws are enforced.
I'll answer that question in a straightforward fashion. I think it is a living document. I think as the Supreme Court did in the Bruin case, which is the firearms case, is to go back and decide, well, we're not going to balance public interest against the modern weapons of war today. We're simply going to go back and look and see what was regulated back in 1789 makes no sense. So why brought up the machine gun point? There were no machine guns, so if machine guns weren't regulated back in 1789, then according to the Supreme Court, if you spin that all the way out, well, then you can have a machine gun. And let's be clear about another gun safety law that my opponent opposed. Red flag laws, which allow you to go to court, police or family member, to get guns out of the hands of someone who poses a threat to themselves or others. In that instance, according to my opponent, the Second Amendment trumps the safety of that person and their family members. I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that because I believe that the Supreme Court is wrong when it engages in textualism. Here's my point about advocating for laws that matter. Okay? We went to the General Assembly this year because our child neglect law wasn't strong enough to protect children. Wasn't strong enough. We went up there and got that law changed. If your Attorney General isn't doing that, if your Attorney General isn't changing the consumer protection law, if your Attorney General isn't changing the health care law that allows us to block the merger in a way that is advantageous to Rhode Islanders, then Rhode Islanders lose. And so you can look at the job in two ways. All the authority you don't have, or all the authority you believe you have, and then exercise it. Because when you exercise it, you make Rhode Islanders' lives better. We blocked the sale of Prospect and Fatima hospitals. It had never been done before. The AG had never acted in that way. The Department of Health was in favor of selling those hospitals. I blocked it for this reason. I made him put $80 million in the bank to keep those hospitals open. Had I not done that, those hospitals would be closed and those workers would be out of work. So you can decide I don't have the authority, or I'm afraid of my authority, or you can decide I have the authority, I'm going to fight for the people. Until someone tells me I've lost. And that's how I go into this. I want to know what I can do to help the people of the state of Rhode Island. And if I think I have it in my authority, then I'm going to exercise it, because I believe that's how I help everyday Rhode Islanders.
How do you plan on protecting the LGBTQ rights of citizens in Rhode Island?
Yeah, that's a great question. After I became teacher, it was clear to me that the LGBTQ plus community and others, their civil rights were not being adequately protected across the state of Rhode Island. So we created a civil rights unit for the first time in the office's history. And so we have brought a number of cases where people have been targeted because of the color of their skin or because of whom they love. And we have not always had success in those cases, but that doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is the fight was a worthy one, and I'm going to keep fighting it until we get those cases where they need to be. Part of that problem is because the law needs to change. There are certain communities that are not included in our civil rights law. We've gone to the General Assembly to try to fix that. We've gone to the General Assembly to try to fix our hate crimes law. It's another example of where you can either let the work come to you and do nothing, or you can see a problem and try to fix it. So we're bringing the cases, even though we know right now, on the law as it stands right now, if we get a judicial interpretation that doesn't go away, it's an uphill climb. We're going to keep bringing those cases, and we're going to keep going to the General Assembly and get the law passed, because again, that's the job. You see a problem, you see a community that's not adequately protected. The Attorney General needs to fight for the people. I am the people's lawyer. Part of the way you do that is you go get the law changed. If the law isn't protecting children, if it isn't protecting consumers, if it isn't protecting the LGBTQ plus community, you go to the General Assembly and try to get it fixed. That's what I believe in, and that's why I love this job.
Rhode Island has some of the most strongest and vigorous protections for all people to be treated with respect and dignity throughout the state. They have some of the most strongest anti-discrimination laws throughout the country. If I'm elected Attorney General, I will absolutely make sure that those laws are enforced, that they are vigorously enforced. I'm not going to wait for the work to come to me in that respect, because that is a situation where I believe everybody deserves dignity, everybody deserves to be respected, and you should not be treated differently because of your sexual orientation, ethnic background, gender, whatever, what have you. You are all entitled to be treated with the dignity and respect that any other person in this country is entitled to be treated with. So discrimination will not fly when I'm the Attorney General.
We will now move on to our closing statements. First will be Mr. Calenda. 1 minute.
Thank you again to North Kingstown High School. Thank you all for having us here today and giving us an opportunity to showcase our opposing views on what the role of the Office of the Attorney General is and what we would do as the Attorney General. I think I've made it abundantly clear that as the Attorney General, I will be your chief advocate when it comes to protecting your constitutional rights. Not based on what I think personally, but based on what the law and the Constitution requires me to do. I don't supersede any other court. I don't supersede any other legislative body. It's my job to enforce the Constitution and laws. I cannot sit here and say, because I believe the United States Supreme Court was wrong, that I don't have to follow that law. That is wrong and is a partisan approach, and I'd be substituting my judgment for the highest court of this land in order to go take the approach that Mr. Neronha has advocated for. I will be the advocate for all of you within the bounds of our Constitution and our laws. I will not be up there advocating for partisan causes. You have elected representatives, senators, and a governor to make sure that the laws you want and the values that you want to see here in the state of Rhode Island are going to be put into place through the legislative process. And that is the proper form for it to be done. Once that's done, that guides the decisions that I make through my office as to whether or not I'm going to enforce or defend those laws as consistent with our state and United States Constitution. And for those reasons, I believe I am the best qualified person to run the office of the Attorney General, and I look forward to doing so for the next 4 years. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us, Mr. Calenda. It's good to be with you. Lawyers Weekly did an article on this race recently, and they described the outlook of the candidates pretty differently. They described my view of the office's approach as expansive, and they described my opponents as limited. And I think that fairly captures the differences between us. The Attorney General is a people's lawyer. Since I've been back to Rhode Island after leaving Boston, where I went to college and law school, I've never had a private client here. My only client has been you and your families. I really believe in that work. I believe in doing that work to the best of our ability and thinking globally about what our role can and should be. We've done things in these first 4 years that prior attorneys general have never done. We've gotten involved in environmental matters that in the past the office would never have gotten involved in. We've gotten involved in public utility matters and act on climate matters, climate change matters, that the office in the past had never gotten involved in. We went to the legislature, changed our consumer protection law so we could go after car dealers that are adding $4,000 to the price of a car when you get down there after you test drive it. All of that work is new. And all of that work comes from a philosophy that says, figure out what your powers are, and don't think of them as limited. Think of them as expansive. Because when you think that way, you can help Rhode Islanders one by one, by one, by one. And you can really make a positive impact on their lives. So whether it's public safety, or defending people's rights as our legislature has defined them. Whether it's working hard, healthcare, the environment, consumer protection. It's work that I love, and I would be incredibly grateful to the voters if I'm returned for 4 more years. So again, thank you for having us today. It's really great to be back.
On behalf of all the students and teachers of North Kingstown, thank you for most of your participation and support for our candidates today. Thank you.